He only wanted to be taken seriously, not to prove anything, not to win anyone's heart. But when she laughed and said, "Fix this engine and I'll marry you," something shifted. Not in the machine, in the room, in the air, and most of all, in him. This isn't just a story about fixing an engine. It's about restoring dignity, confronting prejudice, and witnessing how one man's quiet resolve shattered every expectation in the room, including hers. Asterisk. The hills of Valparaiso have their own rhythm, a heartbeat that pulsed through its graffiti-covered walls, winding staircases, and the slow chug of buses climbing up its steep, unforgiving roads. Somewhere on one of these hills, Cerro Barran, to be exact, stood an old, cluttered auto repair shop with a red tin roof and cracked glass windows. Inside it, surrounded by the smell of oil, rust, and forgotten ambition, worked a man named Malik Diarra. People in the neighborhood called him El Negro Silencioso, the silent black man, not out of malice, necessarily, but because he rarely spoke more than a few words and always kept his eyes on the machines. He didn't mind the name. In fact, he preferred being underestimated. Machines spoke a language no one else bothered to learn. Malik? He listened. Malik had lived in Chile for 15 years, arriving with nothing but a duffel bag, a faded diploma from a technical school in Dakar, and a head full of knowledge that no one here seemed to care about. For a while, he had tried to get a job with one of the big car companies in Santiago. He wore the one good shirt he owned, polished his shoes with a banana peel, and knocked on every glass door with hope burning in his chest. But they all looked through him, not at him. He was too foreign, too quiet, too black. So he returned to the port city, to the hills, and took up work in a dusty garage owned by an old man named Don Emilio. Don Emilio was a relic of another time, gruff, chain-smoking, and half-blind, but he saw something in Malik that others didn't. When he handed Malik the keys to the garage for the first time, he said, "I don't care if you're from the moon. If you can make an engine purr, you've got a place here." Over the years, Malik became a fixture in the neighborhood. He fixed engines other mechanics gave up on. He didn't use manuals, he didn't use computers. He used his ears, his fingers, and his gut. Kids watched him from the doorway, wide-eyed, as he brought dead vehicles back to life like some kind of wizard. But still, beyond these narrow streets, no one knew his name. That all changed the day Camila Rojas walked into the garage. She didn't belong there, not in her tailored black slacks, crisp white blouse, and expensive boots that clearly weren't made for oil-stained floors. Her hair was tied into a precise bun, and her gaze was cold, almost metallic. She was followed by two younger men in matching corporate polos with the logo of Isertec, a German-Chilean automotive firm known for developing experimental hydrogen engines. Parked just outside the garage was a sleek black test vehicle that looked completely out of place next to the beat-up Toyotas and ancient Fiats Malik normally worked on. "We were told this place has a mechanic who can solve problems nobody else can," Camila said in Spanish, scanning the dusty workspace with poorly veiled skepticism. Her tone was neutral, professional, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes as she looked at Malik. It wasn't the first time he had seen that look. It never got easier. Malik simply nodded and wiped his hands on an old rag. "What's the come-to issue? The prototype engine keeps failing during ignition. We've had 6 engineers look at it. No one's been able to figure it out." "I don't expect miracles, just a fresh pair of hands," she replied, clearly implying she didn't expect much at all. Her assistants chuckled quietly behind her. The car was wheeled in. Malik didn't ask for schematics or computer diagnostics. He opened the hood, tilted his head slightly, and stood in silence. 10 seconds passed, then 30, a full minute. The young engineers exchanged glances. Camila folded her arms. And then, without warning, Malik spoke. "This isn't a timing issue. It's a gas flow problem in the second stage injector. Whoever assembled it didn't adjust for the altitude change. Your test runs were in Santiago, right? You've gained 200 meters of elevation here. It's enough to disrupt the pressure balance. Camilla blinked. The room fell silent. How would you even know that just by listening? One of the assistants asked. Incredulous. Malik ignored the question and walked toward his toolbox. Camilla, for the first time, seemed genuinely caught off guard. If you're right, she said slowly, almost mockingly now, and you fix it on the first try, I'll marry you. The assistants laughed. Even Don Emilio, listening from his radio chair in the back room, let out a wheezy cackle. Everyone laughed except Malik. He didn't even smile. He just said, okay. It was the way he said it, quiet, almost emotionless, yet somehow weighty, that made the laughter stop. Camilla raised an eyebrow, confused for just a moment, then shrugged. Well, let's see your magic, then. And so he began. It wasn't magic. It was precision, intuition, years of solitude and obsession with how things worked beneath the surface. Malik adjusted the injector manually, recalibrated the intake with a tool he had welded himself, and ignored the eyes on him like he always did. He moved with focus, like a musician tuning an ancient violin that no one else knew how to play. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. When he closed the hood and nodded, Camilla gave the signal to start the engine. It roared to life. Smooth, clean, without a single stutter. Her jaw tightened. The two assistants looked like they'd seen a ghost. No one spoke. Malik wiped his hands again, slower this time. You said if I fixed it, you'd marry me, he said, not smiling, not teasing, but simply reminding her. Camilla scoffed awkwardly, trying to mask the sudden blush rising to her cheeks. It was just a joke, she said quickly, her voice losing its edge for the first time. I don't joke about engines, Malik replied, and with that, he walked away, leaving Camilla speechless, the assistant silent, and something else, something unspoken, lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Camila Rojas wasn't the type to dwell on awkward moments. At least not until now. That night, after driving back to her sleek corporate apartment in downtown Valparaiso, the image of Malik Diarra, calm, unreadable, and unapologetically confident, kept flashing in her mind like an engine light that refused to go off. She told herself it was nothing. Just a mechanic with a flair for dramatics. Just a silly joke that had landed in the wrong ears. But beneath her carefully constructed logic, something festered. She had underestimated him. And she hated that feeling more than anything. At Isertech's coastal facility the next morning, her inbox was flooded with internal messages about the fixed prototype. How did you get it working? Our Berlin office wants the details. Is the mechanic available for hire or consultation? Camilla stared at the screen in disbelief. She had flown halfway across the country, exhausted her top engineering contacts, and spent weeks diagnosing a problem that a single man, someone without credentials, corporate ties, or even formal recognition, had solved in under an hour. She didn't reply to any of the emails. Instead, she closed her laptop, grabbed her car keys, and headed back to Cerro Barron. The garage was quieter than the day before. It always was in the early hours, before the midday heat filled the hills with the sound of scooters and shouting vendors. Malik was already working, sleeves rolled up, his fingers elbow-deep in the open chest of an old pickup. He didn't look up when she walked in. Camilla cleared her throat. I just wanted to say thank you. Again. Malik tightened a bolt. No need. She hesitated. What you did yesterday, it impressed a lot of people. Still no eye contact. Good. Camilla took a step closer. They want your help back at the facility. Paid consultation. Could lead to more work. That got his attention. Malik looked up slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time since yesterday. There was no resentment in his face, no smugness either. Just calm, measured curiosity. They want my help because the engine worked. Yes, Camilla replied, a bit thrown off by his directness. But they wouldn't have wanted my help if it hadn't. She blinked, not knowing what to say. And you, he added, gently closing the hood of the truck. You wouldn't be standing here either. Camille, a flushed guilt creeping into her cheeks. You're right, she admitted, though it tasted bitter. I judged you. I assumed things. Malik wiped his hands with a cloth and leaned against the truck, folding his arms. People like me get judged every day. I'm used to it. That stung more than she expected. That joke I made yesterday. She started, then stopped. What? About it? He asked. It wasn't funny, she confessed. And it wasn't fair. For a long moment, Malik said nothing. Then, you offered a contract. She froze. What? You said, fix this engine and I'll marry you. That's a contract. Oral, sure, but still. His eyes glinted slightly. You're joking now, she said with a nervous laugh, trying to shift the tension. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. I told you I don't joke about engines. Camille stood there in silence, unsure if he was teasing her, testing her, or dead serious. The air between them thickened, not with anger, not even with romance, but with something deeper, a challenge, a tension neither of them knew how to name. Just then, Don Emilio shuffled in from the back room, cigarette dangling from his lip. You two having a lover's quarrel already? He croaked, amused. Camilla's face turned crimson. No, sinner, nothing like that. Malik didn't deny it. He just nodded respectfully and returned to his work. Later that day, Camilla sat at a cafe near the harbor, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly while replaying the entire interaction in her mind. Something about Malik bothered her. It wasn't arrogance, he wasn't arrogant, it was certainty. A quiet confidence that came from pain, perseverance, and something else. Pride, not the loud kind. The kind that was buried deep, invisible. Unless you paid attention, and against her better judgment, she found herself wanting to pay attention. By the end of the week, she had spoken to her manager and arranged a formal partnership. Malik would be invited to assist on 3 prototype engines over the next month. He would be paid well. And though she didn't say it out loud, Camilla knew she wanted something more than just his expertise. She wanted to understand him. She returned to the garage with a document in her hand, ready to propose the deal. When Malik took the paper, he didn't glance at the terms first. He looked at her, just for a moment. Long enough to make her nervous again. Do I sign with a pen? He asked slowly, or with a ring? Camilla laughed, awkward, uncertain, too loud. Please, let's not pretend you actually want to marry someone like me. Malik tilted his head. You said it. Not me. And for the first time since they met, Camilla saw the corner of his lips curl, upward, not a full smile, but close. The game had begun. The workshop at Isertech's Valparaiso testing facility wasn't like the garage on Cerro Barron. Here, everything gleamed. Brushed steel benches, organized tool cabinets, digital diagnostics, and engineers in spotless uniforms who walked with quiet arrogance. Malik stood among them, not in uniform but in his oil-stained overalls, unbothered. He didn't belong in their world, and he didn't try to. He was there for the machines, not the men. Camilla watched him from behind the glass office upstairs. He didn't talk much, didn't brag, didn't try to impress anyone. And yet, somehow, that made the others feel threatened. She saw it in the way they whispered. Saw it in the side eyes, the stifled chuckles when Malik worked with bare hands instead of the digital calibration tools. He ignored it all, until the murmurs turned into something more. It started with small things. A tool missing from his station. A vital part misplaced from the inventory. Diagnostic software suddenly logging him out mid-scan. Malik never said a word, but Camilla knew. She'd seen it before. Subtle sabotage masked as workplace accidents. Technicians defending their pride under the illusion of protocol. She confronted the team, warned them. But that only fueled the quiet. Resentment, especially from Cristobal, a junior engineer with a spotless degree and a fragile ego. Cristobal was handsome, confident, and deeply insecure. And he hated that Camila was paying attention to Malik both professionally and, lately, something more. One afternoon, Malik was working on the prototype engine, nicknamed Model Echo, a complex hybrid of hydrogen combustion and digital ignition. It had stumped the team for weeks. Camila watched him as he listened to it run, head tilted, eyes closed. He made a single adjustment to the ignition valve, a small, instinctive correction. When the engine purred, the entire room went silent. Cristobal stepped forward, forcing a smile. "That was luck," he muttered, "right?" Malik didn't respond. Camila did. "It was precision," she said firmly. "And you've had 3 weeks with it." Cristobal's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. Later, Camila cornered Malik in the back corridor of the facility. "You should say something," she urged. "About the way they're treating you." He looked at her, calm as always. "Why?" "I'm not here for them, but they're trying to push you out." "I've lived my whole life being pushed out," he replied quietly. "I stopped caring where doors lead. I make my own." Camila leaned against the wall, exhaling. "You know, I used to think the only way to survive in this field was to be the smartest person in the room. But you..." She stopped herself. She wasn't sure where that sentence was going. Malik glanced at her, sensing the shift. "You still think about the joke?" She rolled her eyes. "You're not going to let that go, are you?" "You made a promise," he said with a slight smirk. Camila laughed more sincerely this time. "You'd be a terrible husband. You never talk, I'd listen." "That's rarer." She stopped laughing. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. They both looked away. Over the next few days, things escalated. Malik submitted a full redesign of the intake valve system for Model Echo, based on an old Senegalese pressure compensation technique used in agricultural machinery. The concept was so out of the box that the senior team didn't know how to respond. Camila, however, backed it fully. The prototype ran more efficiently than ever before, and Cristobal lost a dot in a closed-door meeting. He questioned Malik's qualifications, his right to contribute to proprietary designs, and accused him of bypassing security protocols. It wasn't a debate, it was a deliberate ambush. Camila was in the room. So was the regional director. Malik didn't raise his voice. He just sat there, hands folded, as the accusations poured. Then he spoke. "In the villages where I grew up, when a machine broke down, we had no manuals, no parts. We learned to make a solution with what we had. That's what I did here. Your machines don't care where the solution comes from. Only people do." Silence. The director asked for a technical demonstration of Malik's system. Camila stood up and said, "He already did one on the floor, in real time. The data's in the test logs." The room dispersed slowly, but not without tension. Malik had won, but the war wasn't over. That night, Camila found herself back at the garage on Cerro Baron. She had brought empanadas and 2 bottles of local beer. Malik was under a truck, half covered in grease. "You didn't have to defend me," he said, crawling out to sit beside her. "I wasn't defending you," she lied. "I was defending the engine." He looked at her and said nothing, but the way he handed her a cold beer told her he saw through her. They sat in silence, watching the fog roll in over the hills, until finally she asked, "Why do you stay quiet when people attack you?" He took a sip of beer. "Because words don't fix engines. And they don't fix people either." She didn't know what to say to that. Not yet. But for the first time, she didn't want the silence to end. The storm came on a Tuesday. Not from the sky, but from the boardroom. Izertech was preparing for a live demonstration of Model Echo, the prototype engine Malik had helped resurrect from failure and frustration. Representatives from Berlin, Santiago, and even investors from Canada were flying in. It was meant to be Camilla's victory, her redemption after 3 years of struggling to prove herself in a male-dominated engineering world. But instead, it became a battlefield, the night. Before the demo, Malik was pulled into an emergency meeting. Without notice, without explanation, inside the glass-walled room were 3 people. Christabel, the regional director, and a new face, Alfred Becker, an executive from Berlin, sent to oversee the rollout. Camilla wasn't invited. Becker cut to the point with sharp German precision. We've reviewed the internal documentation. It appears Mr. Diarra contributed significantly to the design changes in Model Echo, but lacks any formal engineering credentials recognized in our global system. Christabel chimed in, smug. We're concerned about liability. If something goes wrong during the demonstration, and the source of the redesign is unverified. Malik repeated slowly, his voice even. You have no degree recognized by European accreditation. Becker continued. Your experience is practical, valuable perhaps, but not official. So, Malik said, more to himself than to them, I can save your engine. Fix what your engineers failed to fix, but I can't stand beside it. Becker shrugged. I hope you understand this is protocol. You're welcome to watch the demonstration. From the observation room. It wasn't a request. Malik stood. You want the engine, but not the man behind it. I understand. He left without shaking hands. Camilla found him in the maintenance corridor an hour later, hands in his pockets, staring at the wall as if it had betrayed him. When she asked what happened, he told her everything in a single sentence. They want the results, not the name that gave it. Something inside her snapped. She stormed into the boardroom. Her voice was calm, but her fury was visible in every step. You can't cut him out. Without Malik, this engine wouldn't exist. Becker didn't even look up from his tablet. Then it's unfortunate he didn't come through proper channels. That's a lie, she snapped. You just don't want to admit you were saved by a mechanic from Cerro Baron with more skill in his fingers than you have in your entire team. Becker's eyes finally met hers. Be careful, Ms. Rojas. You're speaking out of emotion. No, she said coldly. I'm speaking out of principle. Later that night, she found Malik closing the garage. He didn't say anything. Just unlocked the gate, stepped inside, and went straight to work on an old van like nothing had happened. But Camilla wasn't having it. You're really not going to fight them? She asked, stepping into the dim light. They'll never see me as an equal, he said flatly. Not with a certificate. Not without one. She crossed her arms. You fixed their engine. You made it better than it's ever run. And still, he said. Finally, looking at her, they'd rather put their name on my work than let me put mine. Her voice dropped. What if I don't let them? He narrowed his eyes. I'll pull out of the demo, she said. I'll tell them I won't stand by a project built on theft. Malik stepped forward. Don't do that. You've worked your whole life for this. So have you. The silence between them now was not cold. It was electric. Then she said it. Remember when I said I'd marry you if you fixed the engine? He raised an eyebrow. Yes, I think you did more than fix it, she said softly. You showed me something I forgot existed: integrity. He chuckled, finally, just barely. Are you proposing? She stepped closer. I'm proposing something more dangerous. What? A partnership. The next morning, the demonstration hall was filled with cameras, suits, and the quiet hum of tension. On stage was Model Echo, humming flawlessly. Under glass, Christabel stood beside it, beaming. Becker took the mic to open the event. Then Camilla walked onto the stage and took the microphone from his hand. Before we begin, she said, voice strong, you should know the truth. Becker tried to interrupt, but she pressed on. This engine wouldn't exist without the contributions of one man you all refuse to acknowledge. His name is Malik Diarra. And if he's not allowed to be recognized today, then I won't be part of this. Gasps. Murmurs. Cameras flashing. Becker froze. Christabel went pale. Then Malik entered the hall. The applause began slowly from the back of the room. Then more. Then everyone. Camila turned, smiled at him, and whispered, "Told you I don't make jokes about engines." Either. The days following the engine's miraculous revival were a blur for both Quaim and Ingrid. The coastal town of Bergen, usually so steeped in quiet routines, now buzzed with whispers about the black mechanic who resurrected a lifeless diesel. Relic, something even the trained engineers had called a hopeless cause. Quaim, despite the modest way he carried himself, couldn't ignore the sudden flood of curious visitors to his workshop. Locals came under the pretense of oil changes or brake checks, but it was clear they wanted to see him. The man who had made an impossible promise come true. But while others were awed, Quaim was unsettled. Not because he doubted his skill, but because he doubted Ingrid's words. Her challenge had come during a moment of levity, a sarcastic jab wrapped in disbelief. And now, though she hadn't said a word about the marriage promise, the silence between them felt louder than any crowd. Ingrid, meanwhile, was navigating a storm of her own. She hadn't meant to fall for the mechanic, not really. But watching him work, not just with precision, but with reverence for the machine, had peeled back layers of her own prejudice. The engineer in her had been humbled. But it was the woman in her who now felt raw and exposed. At the university, Ingrid's colleagues were incredulous. "You're telling me he fixed it without a schematic? No high-pressure injector rebalancing? And it runs? Like, actually runs?" She nodded again and again. But each time she told the story, something tugged at her. A guilt, almost. She had laughed at him, challenged him. And in doing so, she had unintentionally laid bare a truth she hadn't been ready to confront, that her admiration, and maybe something deeper, was no longer just technical. One rainy evening, Ingrid found herself standing at the doorstep of Quaim's workshop again. He was seated inside, polishing a carburetor, his hands moving slowly as if lost in thought. He looked up when she opened the door. "Ingrid," he said softly. "Back again?" She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I came to say something. And I won't drag it out," she began, her voice trembling. "When I said, if you fix it, I'll marry you, I never thought you'd do it. I said it because I didn't believe in you, and that was unfair, arrogant, maybe even cruel." Quaim said nothing for a moment, just nodded slowly. "I didn't take it personally," he finally said. "But I did take it seriously." She blinked, her throat tightening. "I can't offer you marriage because of a joke I made," she continued. "But I can offer you something real. A start. Something honest." Kwm. He stood then, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, two people who had collided not just through machines or metal, but through pride, humility, and unexpected vulnerability. "I've had people look at me and see only the color of my skin," Quaim said, "or my calloused hands, but you challenged me like an equal. And that matters." Ingrid laughed lightly through the tears beginning to brim in her eyes. "I think that's the nicest way anyone's ever told me I'm insufferably arrogant." Small smile spread across his lips. "You're not arrogant. You're brilliant. You just needed someone who wasn't afraid of your fire." They stood in silence for a moment longer, the sound of soft Norwegian rain tapping on the windows like a gentle drum. Then Ingrid stepped forward. "Coffee, my place?" Quaim didn't hesitate. "I'd like that." The days that followed weren't a fairy tale. There were awkward silences, clashing schedules, and moments when they both reverted to old habits. Ingrid was methodical, precise, and preferred spreadsheets over spontaneity. Quaim, meanwhile, lived by instinct, his hands guided by feel, not figures. But somehow it worked. They began to collaborate, repairing vintage engines on weekends, Ingrid sketching new solutions while Quaim applied them in real time. Their partnership became known across Bergen, not just because of what they could fix, but because of what they had become, a symbol of unlikely chemistry, forged in oil and fire, humility and defiance. Months later, they found themselves at a classic engine expo in Oslo. As guest speakers, KWME stood in front of a packed room with Ingrid beside him. He shared the story of the engine that had brought them together, not just the technicalities, but the emotions behind it. The disbelief, the challenge, the connection. At the end of the talk, someone from the audience raised their hand. Did she ever make good on her promise? The man asked with a smirk. Ingrid turned to Quaim, her eyes playful but serious. I'm working on it, she said, squeezing his hand. Quaim looked down at her. Take your time, he replied. I'm not going anywhere. And the audience applauded, not just for the engine, but for the story behind it. A story of two minds, two hearts, and one impossible promise that became something beautiful. The morning sun cast a gentle light through the large windows of the small chapel nestled on the outskirts of Bergen. Outside, the fjord shimmered beneath the early spring sky, calm and steady, a perfect mirror to the moment unfolding inside. Quaim adjusted his tie nervously, the fabric unfamiliar against his skin after years spent in grease-stained shirts and oil-smeared overalls. Ingrid stood beside him, her fingers entwined with his, her eyes reflecting a mixture of joy and quiet disbelief. Today was the culmination of a journey neither had planned, but both had embraced with cautious hope. The room filled quickly with friends, neighbors, colleagues, people from the workshops, the university, and even the corporate halls of ISERTech. Many had watched their unlikely partnership blossom from skeptical beginnings to genuine affection. Some had questioned, others had doubted, but all had witnessed the power of resilience and mutual respect. As the officiant began the ceremony, Quaim's thoughts drifted back to that day in Valparaiso when a laughing challenge had ignited everything. A moment of jest that had turned into a lifetime promise, not of obligation, but of understanding. Ingrid caught his gaze and smiled softly, as if to say, we made it. They exchanged vows not just of love, but of partnership, an acknowledgement of the bridges they had built between worlds of skepticism and acceptance, silence and voice, tradition and innovation. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled in the courtyard, Quaim and Ingrid slipped away to a quiet spot overlooking the water. The salty breeze tangled their hair, and the distant cry of gulls filled the air. Did you ever imagine, Ingrid said, that a joke could lead us here? Quaim chuckled, pulling her close. I never thought a mechanic's hands could fix more than engines. She laughed, tears in her eyes. And I never thought I'd learn so much from someone who refused to fit the mold. They stood there a while, wrapped in the warmth of new beginnings and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because sometimes, the hardest fixes aren't in machines but in hearts. And sometimes, the most unexpected promises become the truest ones of all.